Now, a new survey out by Pew Research Center looked at just at how Republicans and Democrats view scientific consensus on an issue, for example, like climate change, and whether or not a high level of scientific knowledge would correlate to agreeing with that scientific consensus. Now, this survey was conducted during the summer of last year, and it was released by Pew Research. Now, what it did is that it took a representative sample of about 1,500 American adults and asked them about their scientific viewpoints. In particular, it wanted to know what percentage of people accepted the science of climate change in relation to things like rising sea levels, environmental destruction, and extreme weather events. Now, what they found is kind of disastrous. Are you ready for this? Among Democrats, those with higher scientific literacy agreed with the general scientific consensus a lot more than those with a limited scientific comprehension. Now, it looked at Democrats and Republicans. I'm going to talk about the Democrats first, and then we're going to go to the disaster that is the Republicans. So, now, look, among Democrats, as I said, those with a higher scientific literacy said, yes, we agree with these things, right? That we, have higher environmental destruction and that there are going to be some effects from climate change that we're already seeing and we're already feeling. That makes sense. People with a lower knowledge of climate change, of climate science, obviously were like, I don't know what's going on. I don't agree with some of these things. Well, that kind of makes sense. Now, for example, 75% of those with high literacy agreed that climate change causes rising sea levels. 73% agreed that wildlife is going to suffer, and 74% agreed that storms are going to get more severe. These are the people with the highest amount of scientific literacy. Now, as your scientific literacy decreases, you end up seeing less consensus. For example, same among Democrats with low scientific knowledge, you have less of them that agree with the idea that climate change will erode shorelines and beaches thanks to these rising sea levels. Now, how many of them? 33%. Now, these are the Democrats with the lowest knowledge of climate change. They say, okay, yes, we agree with the scientific consensus that we are going to have some erosion of beaches and shorelines thanks to climate change. Now, as I've illustrated, or as the report illustrates, as your scientific literacy increases as a Democrat, the number of people who agree goes up. So the more you know about climate science, the more apt you are to agree with the consensus because, hey, I know the facts now. I was ignorant before. Now I have learned what this is all about. And now, oh boy, I see the effects and all this makes sense. So what happens when you ask Republicans these same questions? Well, according to the survey, there was absolutely no correlation between scientific consensus acceptance and scientific literacy. In other words, the fact that they're Republicans made scientific literacy irrelevant. It doesn't matter if you know a lot about science, if you're very, very literate. It doesn't matter if you're the least literate. You're about the same. There's almost no difference. Disaster. For example, those with almost no background in science responded in much the same way to questions as those with a high degree of scientific comprehension. For example, only 27% of GOPers with a high scientific literacy agreed that climate change caused rising sea levels. And only 19% agreed that storms are more severe because of climate change. Now, again, remember, only 33% of Democrats with low scientific literacy agreed about the rising sea levels. That the lowest Democrats is actually higher than the Republicans who actually have high scientific literacy. That is sad. Let me show you a result. Let me show you a graph on this. Look at the Republican side. In one of them, the storms becoming more severe, higher scientific literacy actually led to less people agreeing with the scientific consensus. I know that's a little bit hard to see. But on the Democratic side, liberal side, the more you know, the more apt you are to agree with scientific consensus. These are people who study this for a living, who look at the data, who do the measurements, all that stuff. Disaster. You have any thoughts yet, Ron?
Uh, sure. I think it just the fact that it's even still discussed, climate science. I mean, it's just total denialism, and we're finally starting to speak in those terms. Because I mean, I was bothered for the longest time, and I know I've probably said this before on the show, where people are just like, "Well, I don't believe in climate
It's not
change."
a
It's like that's
belief.
not something you get to believe or not believe in. You get to believe or not believe in something that can't be proven, like whether or not there's a God, something like that. You can either believe or not believe in that. You can't take a bunch of peer-reviewed, evidence-based data and be like, "Why just I don't believe in this." Well, what don't you believe in? Do you not believe that it actually happened? Do you not believe? Do you think these people are all in on some giant conspiracy and then they're getting rich off these academic journals that 10
Ha.
people read? What are you not believing in? You can say you're denying this because that's what you're doing. You're denying this. The process that you just talked about, Jeff, where when people gain scientific literacy, they change their perspective. That's that thing that Republicans love to cut at every opportunity called education. That's what that is. Hey, I didn't know about this prior. I learned about it, and now my perspective has expanded. That's called education. But if you're going to deny something, well, then that process doesn't happen.
Yeah, and of course, there's a financial incentive to stop that process from happening. To say that, no, we're not going to educate you on this. We're going to shun education because then that might actually make you change your minds. And changing your minds, well, that is not profitable for us. Us being, of course, oil companies, fossil fuel companies, and people who get paid by said companies. Again, disaster. It gets worse. Now, this plays out. This whole process plays out, Ron. Even agreeing whether or not climate change is even caused by human activity. Democrats with high levels of knowledge about science almost all agreed that climate change is mostly due to human activity. That's at 93%. By contrast, 49% of Democrats with low science knowledge think that this is the case. Among Republicans, there are no significant differences, again, by science knowledge about the causes of climate change. And put another way, the Republicans with high levels of science knowledge are no more likely than those with lower levels of knowledge to think climate change is mostly due to human activity. And that, of course, is an epic disaster. What we have now here is a group of people that no matter how educated they are, they decide willingly to ignore evidence. Now, right-wingers love to call people who accept the science on climate change members of a religion. You ever heard that? Like, oh, these
Actually
climate
have not.
alarmists, they're just part of the religion of climate change.
I've heard alarmists. I've never heard
You've never
anybody
heard that?
refer to it as the religion.
I've heard of it.
I mean,
I've
that's
heard
structurally flawed on so many
it
levels.
is. It is. It is so flawed. And that's why I'm talking about it now. I've heard this argument before, and it makes no sense because again, climate science isn't based on belief; it's based on facts and evidence. That's why you show somebody who identifies as a liberal or progressive or a Democrat, and you show them the science, and you say, "Hey, take a look at this. Take a look at this study on Arctic ice, and or watch this documentary on rising temperatures at the sea level." They watch it and they're like, I learned something. And that has actually broadened my horizon. That has changed my perspective. Now I see what's actually going on. You get a right winger to
G.I.
watch it, he's
Joe
like,
taught us years
Jesus,
ago, knowing is half
Jesus,
the
don't
battle.
agree. What'd you say? Sorry.
I said G.I. Joe taught us years ago that knowing is half the battle.
It's true. It's true. But again, these people, a lot of these Republicans, they look at that and go, God said that did not happen.
And bombs are the battle.
Yes.
That's what we learned from G.I. Joe.
We like oil and we like guns.
Yeah.
Hey, I like guns too, but seriously, come on. Why not protect if you want to protect America so bad, why not protect the land inside of America too? Like the trees and the grass and the air. Wouldn't
'Cause
that be nice?
You can't shoot it.
No, you can't shoot at it. That's true.
I mean,
you can't
it doesn't
deport
help
it
if you
either.
shoot it.
You can't deport air. Get out of here, Mexican air. We don't want you. We don't like your kind here. Get out. I know. I'm stereotypical. I apologize, but every time I do that, I get myself into trouble when I do that. I gotta stop.
Okay.
I gotta stop.
I
But
think
anyway,
it's okay.
Again, disaster, right? They ignore the evidence. And when a person goes and learns the facts and changes their perspective, that's a good thing. We want that to happen. Now, if you see something and you see evidence and it doesn't change your perspective because you're willfully ignoring the evidence, well, that's a big problem. That's actually more akin to a religion than anything else to combat that narrative. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's an unshakable faith of, no, I don't believe that this is changing at all. I don't believe in the evidence. I believe in what Bill O'Reilly tells me.
See, I think it's. I don't know. Now we're getting like almost
Are
like
we?
philosophical with. I think denialism is the only way we can frame it at this point.
Yeah.
Because like you can't. Well, I don't believe this is happening. I mean, well, it is. I mean, look at all the data. Like it is. Like, well, our records only go back so far. So what? Like, what's your point? What is that? That means that this doesn't matter at all? That the trends that we're seeing that are disturbing and pretty much unprecedented as long as we've had records, that doesn't matter then? Because, well, it only goes back so far. Like, no, something is happening, and there's evidence that we play a role in it. We play a role in it. In the long run, will the Earth probably be able to shake us off like the virus we are? Probably. But do we really want to push that along? Like it's just such a anti-intellectual, lazy denialism to just be like, climate change, whatever. That's not a thing.
Yeah.
The Earth's bigger than us. Like, no, dude, there's more to it than that. And there's all this science. Even if you're gonna play like the whole like, well, even if you're like a religious zealot, like, well, it's in God's hands. Like, well, isn't part of being a faithful student of God or whatever, uncovering the mysteries that this supreme being left for us? Your logic is void. It's not anywhere. You have none.
Not only that, man, but in the Bible it also says you're supposed to be a steward of the earth.
Right?
So consider,
exactly.
like, if you're a religious person, if you believe that God has entrusted you as a steward of the earth, and, Jesus Christ comes back and he sees that you've trashed the place, you think he's going to be too happy? No, I wouldn't be happy. I'd be like, I smite your ass.
Yeah.
You took my perfect, beautiful creation and you wrecked it. Hey, but you put oil under the ground. I was supposed to use it. No. Sometimes things that are in the ground are supposed to stay in the ground.
Yeah, it's kind of there's a really cool, the comedian Louis C.K.
Mm-hmm.
He has a really funny bit. It actually kind of went under the radar as far as like a lot of his bits go, but it's one of my favorite bits by him. I'm not going to do the bit or anything, but yeah, that's essentially what the bit is. Like, God comes back and he's just like, who took this out of the ground? Why did you do this? And they're like, well, I needed to get to work faster. And he's like, what do you mean? He's like, well, for my job. And he's like, what's a job? What is a job? And they're like, well, you go there and you work. And he's like, why? And then he's like, well, so you can have food. And he's like, I left shit all over the ground. And yeah, anyway. Check out the bit.
I think I might have seen that, actually.
It's one of my favorites. It's really funny.
That's pretty good. But
I'm not doing it justice right now. But
yeah, but anyway, what we're doing to the environment, sad. We're not winning.
Mm-mm.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.